it should be as simple as like what you're saying. I work for this company. I work here. It should be on the company to solve it, because eventually you're going to lead to that tipping point, and especially in the talks Nick and I have had with other people, it is a bit of an employees buyer's market in a sense, especially for employees like who work in retail and
Yeah,
are
yeah,
deskless workers, where at a certain point you kind of need to do whatever they're going to do, whatever they want. And if you're not offering it, the next guy might offer it.
yeah,
So the demand is there, and it should be as simple as it seems.
yeah,
But the only major factor that I think it does lead to some complications, kind of like what you're saying, is where does this person actually live? Like if it is only 60% of your overall staff is living in the place they stay,
yeah,
that it does become a bit of a thing, like what you were saying earlier. It's like, well, it's a bit of a professional courtesy thing, and should there then be penalties in place if you don't say that? And then
yeah,
the rabbit hole is deep, but
yeah.
it seems like there is definitely a bit of a gaping hole in the market here of someone who can handle it without it being kind of like all these disparate systems.
Yeah. We went through this exercise while I was at Starbucks. We were trying to do a mass mailer for something. And it had to do with a historical issue. My memory is a bit fuzzy, but we had a bunch of people who had both separated from the organization, but also a number of active employees that we were trying to get this mailer out to. And we thought, gosh, with so many people being separated, who knows how many may have moved, and I can only imagine how much returned mail we would get if we just went off of the address that we have within the HR system. And we worked with, I think they had a third party provider. It was Rico who was their third party provider, and they did all the mail services and all of that. And the folks at Rico said, well, we can get from the post office, if people move and now they're starting to get mail at the new location, there's some report that we can get. We could provide that to you, and you could do a lookup, and then it would be on you to determine which address you want to use. And we thought, yeah, that's actually a really interesting exercise. So we had the full population of people that were in this sort of impacted population. So some active, some non-active employees. And it was a big list. I mean, you're talking several thousand individuals. And the list provided by now, to be fair, there's no social security numbers or things like that. There really wasn't any other personal identifiable information to really validate that this John Smith on my file for Starbucks is the John Smith that's showing up on the Postal Service record. So, we had to kind of eliminate some things. We had our own creative way on how to do that. But needless to say, for those that we were fairly confident were the same individual, even for the active people, most of those addresses were different. The good news was many were in the same state and even the same city. But if you look at it, it was, they were, location, apartment number 1234, and it's like they moved down the road a couple of miles in a different apartment. So it was one of those like, but it was surprising as to how many of those addresses were different. And we didn't get a lot of returned mail when that mailer went out. So that has to tell me that either the person got it and it wasn't them and they tossed it in the trash and we'll never know, or it was the Postal Service had the right address. And so unless you have some sort of process like that in place where you're relying upon a government entity, but like to me, I'm like, how big brotherly does that feel, right? Where, oh, you, my employer, you are telling me that I now live in a different location. That's creepy. That just that makes me feel really uncomfortable. So it kind of goes back to that. Should we just rely on the employee and set that expectation? And if the answer is yes, and that's my own opinion, I think the answer is yes. But how do you embed and build that muscle, I guess, in your workforce to not just want to be open and tell you where they actually live, but like they remembered it. Maybe it's not the first thing they do when they move, but maybe within a month or so, you get them to update their address. I don't have a great solve for that, but I mean, that's been I've been in, I said to somebody the other day, I've been working professionally for 31 years. This has been a problem the entire time I've been working. So this isn't a new problem, and I don't know how best to address it.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, data privacy also makes it a challenge because
Yeah.
we joked about the Apple Watch
Yeah.
and stuff like that. But if I think back to, I had supported an organization that was focused on mobility, and I talk about mobility like cell phones. And
Okay.
one of the
Yeah.
biggest challenges was everyone nowadays has a smartphone, and also now everyone wants to access their work applications through their cell phone.
Yes.
Salesforce.com.
Yeah.
My wife, for example, has Paylocity, and
Hmm.
so on and so forth. And the question starts to become, when it's on someone's phone, who owns the data?
Yeah.
And for example, one of the solutions at the time was to create a container within the phone that was password protected. So that
Hmm.
way you can store all the applications within your corporation
Hmm.
within that password protected aspect. So can't give your phone to the kid and they can accidentally, get into the CRM and start changing things around and
Right.
so on and so
Right.
forth. But it also became a huge challenge because you had to get sign off in order to do that on their phone.
Yeah.
And I could see the same thing. The only like thing that was jogging around in my mind is if you're using organizational laptops, you can almost start to track where the laptop is being used because there is
Yes.
tracking to that. But it
Yep.
is a little, again, people are very afraid from a big brother, and you have to be very sensitive to the fact that we're tracking you where you're potentially working. But
Yeah.
there's gonna, with all the regulations coming down, what you're talking about is something that is probably more important now than it ever has, just because
Yes.
of that. Because there's so much government oversight from a tax and compliance perspective of where people work. And Dylan brought up Europe. You cross over countries and you have to figure out those types of things. And here in the
Hmm.
States, it's like cities, counties, and states have way different
Yes.
regulations.
Yeah. We found a couple of really smart employees who found a loophole in one of the practices we have here. So there's certain roles that are more entry level, but they do require you to be on site in one of our centers. And those roles tend to pay minimum wage. And in Washington State, the city of Seattle has its own minimum wage, and it's quite a bit higher than other cities within the state. We had an employee who lived close to the center they worked in, outside of the city of Seattle. They were getting whatever that city's minimum wage was. And newer in career, had an opportunity to go live with some other people and maybe save a bit of money on rent. So they moved into the city of Seattle. And then they were driving south into the other city for work. And that triggered something for us to say, oh, they're now in a different jurisdiction, and now they're going to get paid X more per hour because they've moved. And they got this rate increase, and to their credit, they reached out and were like, I'm getting paid a little bit more and I don't really understand. And it was because you're in a different jurisdiction. So what did they do? They told their friends,
Oh.
hey, if you come move up to Seattle, well, then after a while, I don't know, maybe they had a falling out with the roommates or just decided they didn't like the commute. So they moved back into the old city. Well, we're not going to take money away from that person. So they got a bump in pay that they got to keep because they lived in a different city for, I don't know, 4 months, however long it was, realized that, hey, I'm going to get a bump in pay. And they kept that increase. So now you've got the business going, how do we avoid this? Well, there's a couple of ways you can approach it. The minimum wage can be based on where they work, not where they live. This was a nice policy that we had in place. So maybe it's something that we need to revisit. But you've got a grandfather in now. Thankfully, it's a small population of people, but word got out that all I have to do is move or change my address and then change it back. And
Wow.
that's what they did. So, city by city, right? And you were talking I don't know, $2 and some odd cent per hour increase. I'd quit jobs for less per hour when I was younger because God, you could pay me 50 cents more an hour. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So, that's not nothing. And I, part of me was like, kudos to you for figuring out that loophole. But as a business, right, maybe we need to figure out a better way to manage this. And I get it. It's at the end of the day, it's immaterial and it was the right thing to do. But and I think they've since kind of level set what pay so that it's kind of the same no matter where you are.
Yeah.
So we don't bump into this kind of situation. But it was just one of those, it's so complicated. Pre-COVID, people were still moving around and driving back and forth and traveling and the whole bit. And I think jurisdictions and even in Europe, trying to kind of figure out how do we make sure we get kind of our fair share of the tax revenue. And then the pandemic hit and everybody kind of went, unprecedented times. We don't really know. People are kind of going wherever they need to go to take care of loved ones or to shelter in place or whatever. So it kind of became a free for all. And the governments recognize that there is no way we are going to be able to regulate all of the different things we were trying to regulate up till 2019, 2020. And I think as employers, we probably got a little bit lazy and thought, unprecedented times, doesn't matter. The guy says he lives in London, I'm going to just trust he lives in London, and like life goes on. But, now we've moved past that. All of the government agencies are broke because everybody paid out sick pay and furlough pay and whatever pay to keep businesses afloat and to keep people whole and, and try to keep the economy moving along during the pandemic. And so now the pendulum has swung back really hard in the other direction to the point that, we have to, as employers, we have to figure out, even if it's in Excel or on Post-its, we've got to continue to do our due diligence, but it's tough. And loopholes aside and all of that aside, I think, and I just shared this with an employee earlier today, like if we could create that product, right? I get my watch vibrates, like I see you've crossed from, I live in northern Mississippi, right? So I see you've crossed from Mississippi over into Tennessee. Is that right? And I can like, boop, yes, until we have that thing that then takes my data and knows what to do with it all the way to the financial statements, this is the way we're going to have to operate for another, hopefully not 31 years, but for the foreseeable future. Because we're at a point now where the regulatory authorities are just going to become much more aggressive than they were in the past because so much was spent on tending to society for 2.5, 3+ years. So it's as an employer, it's a tough spot to be in because you have to do the right thing. And the joke I have is compliance doesn't care. Compliance doesn't care that the tech doesn't work the way you want it to.
Nope. No, and it's funny that you bring that up because here in Massachusetts, they started talking about New York, for example. They want to add the congestion tax, where in terms of tracking employees, it's not about just tracking employees. It's like if you're going to drive into town, Dylan, correct me if you're wrong, because you might know the actual amount. I want to say it was something like $15 a day or something like that, that they want to put a transponder, like a fast pass, in your vehicle. And if you go into town during the peak hours, they want to charge extra amount of money. And you're thinking, whatever the amount was, that is just crazy because you got people getting paid minimum wage. It's like at least an hour's worth of pay just to get into town. But the town is trying to figure out the ways from a compliance perspective, not the town, excuse me, the city, to basically make things work for them. Like you said, they don't care about everything. They just want their money. They think it's going to decrease congestion was what we're hearing in Boston area, because Boston's like starting to consider the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, New York, it's if you cross below, I think it's 59th Street or something. It's like a street uptown. You get charged congestion pricing. I'm all for it. We have some of the best subway systems on the planet.
Yeah.
Take it. Like it's not dangerous. I've never, it's not the 1990s. It's very
Yeah,
safe. Still
interesting.
one of the safest big cities in the world,
Yeah.
despite the press.
Yeah.
But so I'm all for it. The congestion has gotten really bad, especially
Yeah.
with, like, it's mainly drive share, like Ubers and stuff.
Yeah. I guess, and I think that like for a place like New York that has the robust public transit, to me that makes sense, right? For the people
Mhm.
that are gonna, whether it's the ride shares or people that have their own vehicles, but you think like come out here to Memphis, my first, I don't know, 6, 7 months out here in a conversation with a friend from up in Seattle, I said, I've only seen one bus the entire time I've been here. The system runs 5 days a week. There's not a lot of stops. And
Right.
when you think about the income disparity, I mean, granted, the cost of living is significantly less in Memphis, Tennessee than it is in New York City, but public transit is almost non-existent. And so,
Yeah.
and this is not a place that they would put in a fast pass. Like there's just no need for it because we don't have congestion, unless there's a Grizzlies game or something or a concert, and everybody's going to that. But day-to-day commute, it's not bad. But Seattle, it was kind of the same thing. They instituted, uh, different, not a toll, but basically, yeah, a toll, and it was, price fluctuated. So if you're going to drive in the fast lane between whatever time in the morning and at night when traffic was its heaviest, you were going to pay a premium for that. And it was like, this is going to help with congestion. I drove that road every day from Tacoma, which is south of Seattle, into downtown Seattle every day. It did nothing. Did nothing other than it pissed me off that now I'm sitting in traffic and I'm paying to sit in traffic, but,
Yeah.
and they do have a little bit better bus system, but like, it's nothing like the subway system in New York. So,
Yeah, without the investment in infrastructure,
yeah,
you're kind of
yeah,
just taxing people for the lack of investment in infrastructure.
yeah.
But
They were
because
like,
I just spent a month in Europe, and even some of the smallest, and granted, all these cities were destroyed in the war, but granted, even given that, even some of the smallest cities in Poland
yeah,
and in the Czech Republic, and even and especially in Germany, have subways
of
or
course.
a light rail,
Yeah,
or buses are like the bare minimum. Even if you go in the
absolutely.
middle of nowhere in Czech Republic and Poland, they
Yeah,
still have buses and sometimes even light rail.
yeah,
So it's yeah, but if you don't have that, then you're just taxing people for
yeah,
you're the government not doing its job, essentially. But
yeah. I
yeah,
get it.
but
We need to refill the coffers for paid family leave and in infrastructure, and right, that's where taxes go. It's to all kinds of things, and so it's important, but at the same time I think then help make it easier, right? Like
absolutely.
help us make it, because where does most of that how is that tax revenue collected? It's not collected by and large by people just willy-nilly giving the government money, right? It's through deductions through payroll, through their wage, right?
Yeah.
And sales tax. And so those are really the two big mechanisms. And so you can either jack up the price of sales tax and hit the consumer, or you take it from somebody's paycheck. Either way, I go back to that. If you're going to put that burden on the employer, then help us make it easier. Like help us help you to make this easier. And if you've got people, especially in the Northeast, right, where it's okay for me to live in one state and commute into the other state, that's very normal. Like help us figure out how to make that easier so that, I'm giving money to both New Jersey and New York, and
Yeah.
we're not killing the employee because they're paying double taxation. But I get it, right? Each state is sort of its own country in a way, and it makes things really tough. We're cross training somebody who supports one of our Latin America markets right now on the US. She was like, I don't know how people do it. It's so different. I said, well, part of it is we've been at this for a while, so this isn't new. But yeah, somebody being exposed to it for the first time, I
Yeah.
get it. They're like, every state is its own country. Yeah, it kind of is.
Kind of is.
yeah.
I
Well, I
had
think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Nick.
I was gonna say I had one question because I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts. Every vendor that we talk to these days is coming out with a new AI solution. I
course they
wonder,
are.
yeah, of course, yeah, exactly. I wonder if at some point in time maybe AI could be smart enough to help try to figure out
Yeah.
these types of triggers and things like that. Because that may act, because this is such a complex solution
Mhm.
that you need intelligence, and I don't know if
Yes.
AI is there yet. But I'm almost kind of curious if AI could be. This is the
Yeah.
first time I'm saying, could AI be the solution? Normally, I'm like I kind of, we hear AI all day, every day, and
Yeah.
every vendor has it, but it's such a complex solution. I mean,
Yeah.
complex issue that it needs a complex solution.
Yeah, I think it could. I do think, I mean, we've been really fortunate at Pearson to be able to start looking at kind of through both sides. So externally, we've had vendors come and show us specifically for HR operations, what are some of the opportunities? Where could we use AI? Um, and some of it is, maybe you need it embedded within your existing HCM. That's just an example. Or you've got some bespoke need that that's not the appropriate place. That's not the appropriate use case. You need that maybe a little bit further downstream. And so we've seen some really interesting kind of models around how AI could be helpful. A lot of it is geared towards the employee experience, which I think is great. Anytime you can make the upstream easier, nudge the employee, have you moved? Did you have a baby? Life event, on and on and on. Leaves of absence. My God, we could spend all day talking about that. But anything you can do to make the upstream easier means that the data integrity going into payroll and subsequently into your financials is going to be a lot cleaner than it is today. Not saying that it's not clean, but we know that people make mistakes. They do things after the fact, right? How many retroactive things do you need to kind of go back and address because people just forget? So if you can make the employees and line managers' lives a little bit easier, chances are you're going to make payroll's life, workforce management's life a little bit easier too. I think in the context of kind of this multi-jurisdiction, where is Angela today versus tomorrow? Is it the right rate of pay? What are the tax rules? How do we apportion wages and so on? I think that AI is probably a really great use case for that because it is so nuanced. It is a series of if-then questions. But it could probably do the computation a heck of a lot faster than a human being could, or anything I could probably, in my rudimentary, I'm trying to train myself Python, like I'm not good, but I'm learning. But I think AI is probably that's probably a really great opportunity there to kind of get in and like figure out those different situations, whether it's for the Kansas City Royals and things like that. But you got to have an input, right? There still has to be a trigger. And I think that's one of the critical components that once you have the trigger, AI can now pick up and run with it and do all the computations and say, here's the calculation, or here's the amounts, or here's the thing you've got to do. And it can maybe go do the things for you. But it's that trigger. That's the piece that where could AI fit? I don't know the answer to that. It kind of comes back to if it's a geolocation, it's got to be in the laptop, the watch, in your shoe, in your phone. Like it's got to live, like the trigger has to be somewhere. It's got to happen, right? And then that's going to be, what's going to set off, I think, the rest of AI to do the magic that we need done so badly. So that could be a really great use case. I think right now, because taxation isn't sexy. So if I'm ADP or Oracle or Dayforce or UKG, I'm probably not going to care a lot about focusing on Angela's tax issues right now. I'm going to care about your onboarding. How do you make it a great employee experience to welcome them into the organization? The journey, right, to collect appropriate data, whatever. That's where they're really focusing on kind of the journey, if you will. And what I have seen in demos thus far is that's kind of where it stops. And I think probably because it's still fresh, I think it's maybe just a matter of time before maybe some of the bigger vendors pick that back up and say, let's look at the whole hire to retire experience, and not even retire, but whole you know, again, taking the data down into the financial component, right? Because payroll doesn't just stop when we pay the employee, it goes all the way into the general ledger and all the way into your P&Ls, et cetera. So that's where I think those that are offering AI embedded solutions, I think they haven't quite gotten it quite all the way through. What I'm also seeing is that you've got your HR tech with the embedded AI and you have your finance tech with embedded AI. Those two aren't talking, right? So again, the vendors aren't really incentivized yet, I think, to figure out the holistic picture. I think they're incentivized to really look at, we're just doing a thing for employee experience in HR. And so we're only focused on this piece of the pie, when the reality is, you need to help us figure out the whole journey all the way to the financials, because that's, you know, that for me, that's where the value is. I don't want two different systems and two different digital assistants. Like, give me one thing and a way to like feel really confident that what you've done and how we've taxed and how we've recorded things is right. So yeah, but I do think AI could certainly be the step in the direction to get us to this place where, and maybe that could even take things further into, you know, the Hilton example, right? Two different legal entities, but I want to work at both, and we want them to work at both. And how do we make that happen and make sure that we're paying correctly and overtime's calculated and it's allocated right, you know, in everybody's cost centers.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much. You've really given us a ton of really useful information. It was really informative.
Thank you. Yeah, if
Yeah.
you could develop that you could retire. I mean, that's
Nick and I are gonna get on this right after this call.
that's
Yeah.
right. That's what I was
No,
telling my peer earlier. I said, if I had the know-how, like
yeah.
if I did that, like I'd be good. Like if that could be my legacy, I would die happy. But
Yeah.
I definitely think the potential's there for, you know, I think you're really on the money with the AI piece of it. It's just one of those things where it's almost too many calculations for a human being or a team of human beings to
yeah,
effectively and accurately do without at least one error. And if there's one error, there's going to be a massive waterfall of,
that's
or like an
right.
avalanche of them.
Yeah, yeah.
So it may be our only hope.
The bots are our only hope. I'll
Yeah.
leave you with one thing that's really funny. So you mentioned AI. You may have heard of it. There's I don't know where I read this, but it was last night. I'll have to go back through my email and look. There is a website called Only AI, and it is a social media platform for bots.
Okay.
It's hilarious.
I've never heard of that, but that sounds
It's
interesting.
hilarious. They've got, you know, funny, um, uh, what is it? Funny, like funny prompts, like funniest prompts. For like Chat GPT and bot romance and like it's hilarious. And then they have a topic about cats because bots like cats too. It's so funny. If you have a moment, I would say just Google search only bots or only AI. I looked at it for a few minutes last night and just died laughing because it's just, I was like, of course the bots need their own social media platform. And I think this is it. I'll have to find it. It was really funny. But everything on it is created by artificial intelligence or bots. And you can go on there and you can create your own bot, you know, and have it participate in social media. But it was one of the funniest things I've seen. But I thought this, in a way, this kind of makes sense because our bots need an outlet.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. We really,
Yeah,
truly appreciate it. I mean,
absolutely.
this is a great, I'll tell you that few things have been swirling around in my mind because
Yeah.
I think this is such a great story. I've been in the back channel with Dylan. I was going back from, I'm like, man, this could be like either a really good analyst insight to really question kind of the vendors out there. Is there a solution? Is there something you're doing? But also, quite honestly, the way that you spoke was so great that I'm almost thinking that we could take this video, if you're okay with it, and maybe turn it into like a 3-part podcast series where we just
Yeah.
kind of break it up. Because honestly, you bring up some really great points that I think that not only you struggle with, but others struggle with as well. And I
Yeah.
love to hear those stories from others and kind of almost put out the challenge to the vendors. Like, do you either have a solution that we just don't know about,
Yeah.
or start looking into this, because I think it's going to become more of a problem over time, especially the
Yeah.
way that you know the government is really trying to crack down on, we want your money, we want that, we don't care where you work, it's going to
Yeah.
be set up right.
That's right. And that's only going to get, like I said, it's only going to become more difficult. They're going to become more aggressive, because we had that, 2-3 year period where we just governments hemorrhaged cash, and for right, wrong, or other reasons, it happened. And we have all of these social programs, not just in the US, but in every country, that we just depleted because we had to, right? Or we thought we had to. And so we're at a point now where a lot of states are and jurisdictions are kind of starting almost from scratch because everything got blood dry. So what
Yeah.
do they do, right? And we rely on those programs, things like paid family leave and the like, for people that are taking off for surgery and maternity leave and things of that nature. And so there's an expectation that the employee is going to get the money that they helped, fund from this account. And so it just, I understand the rationale, but I do think that we kind of, not to say we sat on our laurels as employers, because everybody was running like crazy people trying to figure out how do you implement COVID specific protocol and programs and things like that. So our focus was pivoted, as was the regulatory agencies and the like too. So we all got distracted. And now that that has come to an end for the most part, now we're back to like, shoot, we spent all that money. Now what, but we still have all of these programs, right? Some people are still jobless. Some, people do still need paid family leave. And so how do we build that back up? Infrastructure is a big one, right? We've got a lot of infrastructure issues just in the United States. And so a lot of states are trying to get creative about, how do I fund it? How do I build a new bridge? How do we replace the dam? Well, money's got to come from somewhere, right? So I think the aggressiveness is going to start coming to bear. And again, the agencies aren't necessarily going to care about how your business is structured, right? Like, it's on you that you've got people traveling across state lines and multiple legal entities, and they're right, in some way. But there's a lot of really smart, creative people out there. And I feel like if enough people are willing to invest some time and energy and effort, whether it's with the use of AI or other types of technologies, I think we can get ourselves to a point where it isn't so painful. But I also think this is a really interesting space where, where's the Department of Labor in this? Where are the feds in some of this? Because they're going to benefit too. Again, help us, help you, government agency, because at the end of the day, we all just want to do what's right. But when you make it so freaking difficult, like, what do you expect an employer to do? They're going to figure out how to not do it. Is what's going to happen, because it's too hard.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it's
Well,
completely true.
Yeah.
sorry.
Well, yeah, I mean, however you want to leverage what I've said, the recording, whatever makes sense, just, let me know. I'm happy to support, and any of my snarkiness that you want to edit out, that's fine. And
It gives it flair. It's fun.
it's just I'm still kind of wrapping my mind around the fact that it's been over 30 years. I've been at this for over, like, how did I get to be this age? But it's been a really fascinating journey to this point, and it's exciting at the same time because of the technology and because of the way industries have changed. And even though the pandemic was horrible, I think it really forced a lot of creativity, to come to bear. And so we're at a really great point in time, I think, to figure out how do we rather than shy away from some of those things that were hard, and we had a policy that just said don't do it, how do we kind of strip that away now and say, no, we want to come back to this? And yeah, it's hard, but there's some new tech out there and some really smart people. I look at my kid, he'll be 14 on the 21st of April, and the stuff that he and his friends can come up with on the fly, and they're creators at heart, and they crowdsource. I don't know if you guys are around younger tweens and teens. They crowdsource everything. There's like no fear, like, hey, we're going to build a thing, and they all come and they try to build it, and then it doesn't work the way they want, and they go, that didn't work. Okay, now we're going to come over here to this Discord server, and we're going to build a thing, and and they don't ask for permission, and they just do it, and it's iterative, and you can see the progression. And I look at that and I think, I'm tail end of Gen X, so we raise our hand, we ask for permission, and that still gets me in trouble at times. Like, I have a question, can I, but I see this generation kind of coming. They're going to be in the workforce just a few years. God, I hope my kids in the workforce in a few years. They're going to help us help government regulators, help the employers to help them, the employee, because they don't want the trackers injected into them. And they do kind of like their privacy, but they're wired so differently because they all came out of the womb with social media embedded in them and their lives documented and smart devices and the whole bit. And so, it's going to become really interesting, but I think, again, I go back to that. There's a lot of really smart, creative people out there. Tech already exists. I think now it's just a matter of how do we bring it all together. But yeah, it's an interesting point in time. So yeah, I could talk about this stuff all day. You could probably tell.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you so
Thanks.
much. We truly appreciate it, and hope you have a
Absolutely.
great weekend.
Absolutely. Good to see you both. You guys take care.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
thank you so much, Angela.
Bye,
Have a good
everyone.
weekend.
You too.